Okay, now we got AC/DC, so we know we're serious. We're ready to get going here, folks. All right, can everybody hear me okay? Tyson, we good? You can nod?
Loud and clear.
Fantastic. Welcome, everyone, to Becoming Intentional in the Observer's Chair. This is part of the Six-Pack Dad Tribe webinar series, and today we're going to talk about insights into the fitness, nutrition, and mindset realm. This is produced by Tyson Johnson, of course, of the Six-Pack Dad Tribe. My name is Greg Johnson, and I'm your host today. In today's podcast, we examine the mindset of becoming intentional in the observer's chair versus sabotaging behaviors and false identity. I now turn the floor over to Mr. Tyson Johnson, founder of this group of elite performers, to introduce and place some context around today's broadcast. Take it away, Tyson.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Guys, it's awesome that you join us here. We're grateful you're with us. Especially grateful for Greg and Doug. I'll introduce them in a second. Grateful that they would put this on. I think you'll find this is going to be really valuable content for all of us. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I think everyone is muted here. We would appreciate that. As questions arise in today's event, if you could use the Q&A portion just to drop your questions in the chat. We do have a little bit of time at the end for Greg and Doug to address that. So Greg and Doug have both become good friends of mine over the last few years. Greg actually, he's going to tell his story, but as a quick intro, he joined the tribe 2 years ago. He's been so successful, I asked him to join our coaching staff, and I met Doug through Greg. And so Greg is a BYU graduate. He's CEO of WebCheck Security. They do cyber advisory services. He's a grandpa of 6, father of 4, married 38 years, sings with the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. Some of you have probably heard of that. Just an incredible human being. Doug Stoddard, I met him a couple years ago, as I mentioned, through Greg. He's a habit breaker expert for business executives and entrepreneur professionals. He's an intrinsic communication life and business coach, which means he helps professionals reach their highest potential and performance. So he's been an entrepreneur for 36 years, a small business owner, sales and development professional, and a coach. So I'm really excited. We have interviewed Doug before on our podcast, and today is a chance for him to go even more in depth and share some things. So with that, Greg, I'll flip it back to you.
Thanks, Tyson. It's so fun to be here, guys. Doug and I have been working together for a while now. I can honestly say that part of the revenue growth of my company is attributable to Doug and his great counseling and coaching. Every high performer needs a coach, and so I've just kept the ball rolling here. We met probably a couple of years ago. He's an excellent man. I think we met on LinkedIn, Doug, didn't we? And we thought that there might be some common family background stuff within our genealogies, and turns out it was your wife that's related to my dad's side of the family, but Stoddard is an ancient name in our family, so to speak. And so Doug and I became acquainted, and I was just mesmerized by the things that he does for executives. If you'll indulge me, folks, I want to tell you a little bit about my story of the Six-Pack Tribe, and how I came to be involved, and then we're going to turn the time over to Doug to share some really amazing principles here. It was 2020, COVID had broken out. We were all working from home. I had just been laid off as the VP of sales in a cybersecurity company, and I'd taken this company, my company, WebCheck Security. I started that in 2018 to service that other company, and then decided I wanted to bring it out of the shadows and into the light, and make it from a boutique part-time endeavor to a full-time endeavor in a real corporation. Doug and I started working together at that point. I knew that I wanted to learn how to listen better initially to my wife, but I also wondered how much money I was leaving on the table by not properly listening to others. And the rest is history. He's helped me immensely, and in that journey and in growing this company. What I learned is that Doug really helps executives to overcome sabotaging behaviors and achieve peak performance. And so we've just continued to work together. Well, fast forward to Christmas of that year, my doctor in the previous March had told me that I was going to die because my blood pressure was too high. I'd always been a power lifter and a bodybuilder, but I was up to 257 pounds with a blood pressure of about 152 over 90. And the physician assistant, Pete, he says, "So aren't you having headaches?" Like, "Dude, you're going to die. I want to give you some pills." And I said, "No, no pills. I know how to do this." I realized that I needed to make some changes. And so I began to lower my carbs and my sugars. Tyson hadn't come into the picture yet. I got down to about 227. But then the unthinkable happened. I was running around in a backyard and I tore my quadricep muscle. So just by way of reminder, if you remember your anatomy, that's that big three-tiered muscle on the front of your leg. And I tore it right off the tendon. Clean break, fortunately. The doctor said, "We can fix this, but we got to get you right into surgery." So that next Monday I was in surgery. The problem, folks, is that your leg has to be immobile for about 2 months, and then very light rehab work for another couple months. And he said, "Yeah, you won't be back to full strength for a year." At that point, I was sitting there around Christmas. My wife and my kids, who are all grown now, they're all waiting on me. And I realized I was in trouble. I couldn't do cardio. I was still going to the gym and doing upper body, but I realized that half the battle, or 75% of the battle, is won in the kitchen. And somehow, Tyson, I happened upon your ad, and I knew I needed accountability, and I needed a sustainable, systemic lifestyle change. And so I joined the Six Pack Tribe, and the rest is history. I'm still a member of that tribe, participating and coaching as well. So that's my story. I'm now down, I don't know, 47-ish pounds total. I'm down below 20% body fat, and I've been doing it for 2 years now, and I've made it just part of my lifestyle. Well, okay, so one of the concepts here, folks, is that, and let me just make sure I'm in the right place here. It's been hard for us to travel. A lot of us serve in our church and in the community. And to do this six-pack thing right, sometimes we make excuses. "Oh, I couldn't, I was too busy. I had a trip that I had to go on." And as we were talking about this, we realized that some of the concepts Doug brings to the table can really help us. So Doug's segue here into victim's chair, observer's chair, false identity. Why do we do that? Why do we make excuses?
Well, thank you, Greg, and I really appreciate everyone's time here. I don't take that lightly. But first of all, can I share my journey with you in how I was the king of excuses, victimhood, and it might help you understand where I'm coming from here.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I've been married 44 years. We have 6 children. They're all girls except for 5 boys. So if you need any expert help on communicating with girls, I'm your guy. I really am. Because in my story, I'll share why that is. But we have 19 grandchildren. And so we've had a lot of experience, but I was always the guy who could create success from nothing. I was in sales, put me in an area where there was no success, and I would bring it up to the top. So that was an identity I created about myself. Then another identity was everyone was telling us we are such great parents. You have such great kids. Anyone heard that before? Okay. Yeah. And I took it literally, but I placed my value on that identity. So 2 things happened that flipped my world upside down. We had a business at the time. We built it from nothing. It was very successful, in my opinion. We were training a lot of people because my degree is in corporate training. A lot of recognition. All this was coming into play. And then the people we were working with were caught sabotaging, or not embezzling, which sabotaged them, but they're embezzling. And all the lawsuits against them took them down, and it took us down too. We lost our employees, and I ended up in bankruptcy. So here I was, this guy who is ultra successful, in my opinion, and now is bankrupt. And that shattered that identity of I can create something from nothing, and I can always be successful, because for 9 years I tried to recreate it and I couldn't. Second thing that happened was our only daughter and our youngest son for 9 years didn't want anything to do with us. Through her marriage, and we didn't know why. Every conversation, which there's only about 8 of them during 9 years, felt like I was walking on glass. Anyone felt that way before in a conversation or relationship, not knowing what to say? So those two identities were, in my opinion, had disappeared. So that's where I was. And what I've discovered in that process, by the way, I have a beautiful relationship with my daughter and son now, and I have a thriving business. So what shifted in that? And it comes down to 3 points. And the first point is that 90% of our marketplace problems are simply people's personal problems in disguise. What drives those personal problems are subconscious habits of thinking that are stored in your neural pathways, in your brain. And science can measure these. I love neuroscience. I've been studying it for 9 years now. And so that was the first thing I recognized, is that if we try to change our culture at home or in the business place by focusing on behaviors and attitudes, then we're going to feel like we're chasing cats. And maybe you felt that way in your journey of trying to get optimum health. Some days you don't feel like working out. Is that right? Some days you don't feel like you should, well, I don't want to work out, but I also don't want to track what I'm eating. I'm too busy, got too much on my plate, all those kinds of things. So having said that, Greg, would it be okay if I jump in here and share how habits of thinking are created and how they're stored in the neural pathways?
That would be awesome, Doug. Yes, go for it.
Okay. This is real basic. Stoddard Neuroscience 101, okay? But I find that people can really grasp this concept. When I was 10 years old, I was delivering papers, and a big dog bit me. It got infected, lots of shots. It was very traumatic. So once, when I saw another big dog, what did I feel? Fear, anxiety, fight or flight, run. 3 months later, I'm delivering papers, and I have a 10-year-old bully comes out and starts pounding me day after day after day. I didn't know why, but to my brain, he looks like the big dog. What do you do then? You run. So I ran to my mom and told my mom to take care of the bully. That didn't work. It got worse. So from then through my high school years, anytime something got challenging, hard, tough, it felt like the big dog story. And so what do? You quit. You run. And that wasn't serving me at all. And that memory of the dog story and my reaction to it created a pathway, a neural pathway in which a habit of thinking is stored. And I think we all have a dog story. In fact, we have many different types of dog stories. And so what do you get when you have a dog story, a neural pathway? You get a little gate, and on the gate is a button. It's a trigger. And the trigger is the dog story. And when life shows up and it looks like the dog story to your subconscious brain. It goes through all those neural pathways, finds the one that it's related to, pushes the button, and it opens up this gate. And your subconscious dumps chemicals into this little groove. Immediately, you start having emotions, fear, anxiety, stress. You let it go a little longer, and it could be frustration, overwhelm, anger, resentment. If you leave that little gate open for over 90 seconds, guys, it then turns into thoughts. And now we start hearing things. We think it's us because it's in our heads. But it's things like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I figure this out? Or it's needing to be right about your ideas. Or you may find yourself comparing yourselves to others. The next thing that happens is it creates a distortion. So you start seeing yourself in a negative way, less than, not able to, I can't do this. Or it may cause you to look at other people in a distorted way. Think about this. If you had a situation in which somebody wasn't doing something said they would do in a place or at home, and what you began to focus on was their behavior, which then totally blinded you to seeing them as a human being or to step into their world. So that's what you get when you have these habits of thinking. So you get a story, you get emotions, you get this distortion going on, this false narrative, and now you're trying to create success either at home, in your health, or in your business. And you're fighting these emotions, you're fighting these thoughts, and you're hitting the walls of their employees and other people who are also having their habits of thinking. Does that make sense to you, Greg, to other people here? So that's what we're dealing with. But our habits of thinking, there's a cost to every one of those.
You know, I'll just interject, Doug. One of the first things that you taught me when we started working together was the concept of I get to do something versus the duty mindset, I have to do something, right? And you're probably going to get to this, but I have to kind of implies that we're a slave, that we're chained to something, that we're a victim, right? Whereas I get to is I'm in control. So, for example, I get to work out today, right? I get to log my nutrition today. I get to be intentional. I get to plan my trip. And incidentally, I'm leaving to Canada tomorrow. So I boiled a dozen eggs for my wife and I, put them in a baggie with some salt. I've got my protein bars. I've got my amino acid drinks. I've got my pork rinds because they're very low carb. Everything's going to be pre-logged before I even get in the car. It's awesome. So anyway, back to you, Doug. Intentionality. And I get to.
I love that. We call it a habit of thinking that causes you to be in obligation living. And here's how you know if you're in that habit of thinking. It's if you say, I have to measure my food intake, right? I got to go work out. We call it shoulding all over yourself. Should do this, should do that, should not. Man, once again, I was very good at this. And that's obligation living. Let me share with you guys, when that narrative is going on, that habit of thinking, it will shut you down to being motivated, to be passionate. So what Greg said is absolutely correct. Here's a little tip. Here's a coaching tip for you. When you hear that obligation where you have to and you must and you should, the way to shut it off quickly is to simply say, no, I choose to do this. I get to do this. I want to do this. And it shuts that channel down. It closes the gate. And you're not experiencing all the narrative and the emotions that are going on with it. Obligation thinking will never give you enough motivation to succeed long term. It never will. On the other hand, though, there is a way in which you can live in passion-driven living. And we can talk about that another time, but that's, anyway, great question, Greg. Great comment.
I love that, Doug, because there's not a guy on this call that doesn't want to have a fit lifestyle, that wants to be healthy, that wants to throw their grandchildren around and go hiking and run a 5K or whatever, you know, and maybe even have a six-pack and not be embarrassed when you put your swimming suit on. And that's secondary, but we just want to be healthy. And living out of obligation doesn't create that lifestyle. It's not sustainable long-term behavior change.
That's absolutely true. And you mentioned something about what we call the observer's chair. The observer's chair, if you imagine this, you have two chairs. And one of those chairs over there are your habits of thinking. You know you're in that chair when it's clouded with negative emotions, when it's clouded with narratives that are not upbeat or uplifting you or supportive, optimistic. You know you're in that place when you're in judgment, comparison, criticism. You're in that other chair. To me, it's kind of dark. It's raining. It's got all kind of negative energy associated to it. Or you can choose to sit in the observer's chair. And the observer's chair is the place where you take charge of those thoughts. You choose, instead of to be reactive and needing to be right about different things, you choose to see people clearly rather than focusing on what's wrong or the negative or proving your point. So those two chairs, if you recognize you're in that other chair, that's the time when you pull yourself out, and we can give some other tips on how to do that. But it's absolutely right. Can I share a story with you, Greg?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is where I was coaching a financial executive, flies all over the country, extremely busy. Tall man, looked like he was really healthy. His assistant had him booked to the hill. All he did is ding, his phone went off and he was into the next appointment. Maybe some of you have been there before. And we're sitting in his office and he's telling me, I can't work out. I'm not going to pack my carry-on bag with gym clothes. I'm not going to go to the stupid gym in that motel and work out. I'm not, right? Have you felt that way before? It's too hard. I don't have enough time. Do you hear all that narrative going on? I was hearing his habits of thinking. And so I simply asked the question, because I recognize part of the subconscious brain, what it does is it thinks in either or. I either got to have an hour and a half to work out, or I ain't going to do it. That's what it does. If you find yourself in that kind of thinking, either or, that shuts you down and throws you into a locked room with no windows looking for possibility, you know you're in a process of a habit thinking taking over. So that's where this guy was. I simply asked him this question. Well, gee, could you do a push-up? His look was just crazy. What? What did you just say? Yeah, can you do a push-up? He said, well, yeah, I can do a push-up. Well, then why don't you focus on doing one push-up rather than complaining about how you can't do exercise, how you can't work out? It was really amazing. And then you've all read the Atomic Habits, so I applied one aspect, just do one push-up after you've already done something. So I walk out of the office, 1 and 2 minutes later, he texts me, I've done my first push-up. You know, within 3 weeks, he was up to, I think it was up to 39 push-ups or something like that. And he was doing them with his two little girls standing around him yelling, "Way to go, Dad, way to go, way to go." And then he sent me the text, "I'm a push-upper." You see his false identity, and this is what habits of thinking do. They create this false identity about who we are. For him, I can't exercise. I can't work out. Don't have enough time. It's too hard. To the place where he says, now I'm a push-upper. I exercise and it doesn't take much time at all. And I feel good about me.
And Doug, if I could interject here, I think the narrative sometimes we have is, I can't plan my travel. I can't plan the weekend. I can't. It's too hard.
Yeah. Well, why are you saying that? Let me ask you that. Why are you saying that? What is it that what is the identity about it? I can't plan? Is that what you're saying, Greg? Is I can't plan, it's too hard? Is that right?
Yeah, it's too hard. And I'm just regurgitating things that Tyson and I have heard over the, course of the last couple of years, and kind of where we as a group sometimes struggle to maintain our regimen, if you will.
Yeah. Well, when you hear that, once again, the subconscious has locked you into a room that says it's too hard, I can't do it. The first step is recognition. So the second step is to start asking, how can I do it? I have a son that wanted to buy, I think it's 30 acres of raw land for $450,000 up in Idaho. I'm from Idaho. And the banker said, we're not going to loan you that on raw land. And this is the question he said. He said, no, you're wrong, Mr. Banker. The question you need to start asking yourself, if I didn't think it was impossible, what would be my next step? And within 2 months, he had the property. So the question is when you recognize that and you say, I can't, you're in a sabotaging habit of thinking. And so the place to go to that is, how can I do this? What's the simple process of doing this? How can I? So that's a way to cut that circuit, to be able to step into a right mindset.
And Doug, one of our great members on this call here, they said, or my wife is planning and I don't want to be disconnected. We hear that a lot. Thank you. That was awesome. Is, well, I just feel like I'm in a vacuum and blah, 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 blah.
So give me a little more insight on this, because this is intriguing. So, and it's Ahmad. Did I pronounce that right?
Arno.
Arno.
Arno. It's pronounced A-R-N-O.
No. Oh, excuse me. Okay.
Come on, where's your French, Doug?
I can speak like this, but you will be sick and tired of my French accent after 5 minutes.
I can speak Spanish, but not French. A little more insight is if you could. So I understand this clearly. Greg, you want to give me a little more insight on
yeah,
that?
it's not just unknown. It's we hear this from a lot of guys that will get into it, and they're like, hey, my wife's not really supporting me in this. She makes dinner. I have to eat what she puts before me. And it's usually high in carb, high in fat. This is just really hard, right? And that's a recurring theme with a lot of our six-pack tribe members when they first start out. Tyson, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, Greg, you're exactly right. I mean, there's a full spectrum. There's some who, the wife is supportive and makes meal prep a breeze, and it makes living a lifestyle like this much easier. You prep leftovers, and so lunch the next day becomes that much easier. But then there's other men who, yeah, they feel like they're on an island, and they know if left to their own devices, they'll eat ice cream for dinner because they have zero support. Or, you know, we've got kids at home, and it's mac and cheese time, and it's just you feel like you're on an island. If I'm explaining that correctly, if that's how the audience feels.
Thank you for explaining that to me. It's years ago, at one point I had 10 chronic illnesses going on, and I couldn't eat any gluten, any of those things. And I felt like I was on an island because my wife kept preparing all this food to give me migraines. So my question is if you're in that situation, have you had a conversation with them where you actually are asking how they feel about it, and where are you coming from with it, and why you are doing it? Have we had a conversation? Because I've found in my situation, other people's situation, is that we hold off on having a conversation because it ends up in an argument. They don't feel heard, they don't feel understood, or you don't. And so then we don't say anything. So I don't know if that's the case with you.
I think it's more about the impact that the impact of me changing my habits. What will that have on the family?
Okay.
It's really more about, I hate to say this because I sound selfish, more about me, but also what impact is that going to have with the family? I think that's and we're talking about the six-pack dad tribe, but we can talk about anything for that. If I want to change careers, for instance, and not make money for 6 months, it's gonna be the same thing. How do you deal with, I would say, communicating and expanding that breaking habit or the new habit?
With your wife or whoever, right? Yeah. Well,
Yep.
Once again, it's being able to have a conversation where you can articulate, where you can have, once again, a conversation. So what I would encourage you to do, and you can certainly reach out to me on this, but that is to be able to take charge of yourself. You still are 100% responsible for what you do, right? So you would be able to create what it is you wanted to create as far as food choices, and then have a conversation with your wife on how she could support you in that. Because you are taking on a new habit, and there's a lot of pushback, right? There's pushback from your wife, etc. There could be because it's new for them and they don't know how to cook for it. And how do I cook just for you when I've got the rest of the family to cook for? So there's a pushback on their side of it. And so the process with me in this, as I'm working with our clients, is how do you feel about having the conversation? What happens when you do have that conversation? Does it end up in a heated argument, or do you feel understood? Let me ask you what she has said to you, Arnaud.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I don't want to take the whole thing, but hopefully this can help others. But it's really about, I would say, me willing to get out of my comfort zone, and my wife not willing, because she is afraid, and going deep into this, has some self-esteem issues, and going through them a little bit. And I'm sure she'll figure something out, but I'm already allergic to gluten, so she's already making 2 different types of food for my son and her and myself. So that's and I think it's more about the sustainability of this, and not like, oh, well, this is something he's going to do for a month, no problem, we'll do it, and then it'll be over. But the talk is there. I think it's more about getting back into a regular routine. All of a sudden, you get invited out to go eat at a friend's place, or to binge drink or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're back into that, I would say, negative spiral. I go, I did it once, so you know what? I'll do it again in 2 days. I made a little sidestep. Great, I'm going to make 10 more sidesteps, and I'll start back fresh. Like you said, reserving, hey, I don't have that hour to go work out, so what's the point of going to work out? I'll do it next time I have that 1 hour. It's kind of the same process.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's so what happens when you have a habit of thinking? It will create all the reasons why you shouldn't do something, so that it keeps you stuck. See, our subconscious has two things that it's supposed to do: keep us safe and predictable. And starting something new, as you know this, it's not predictable because you have no experience with it. So it must not be safe. And so that's where we get all the excuses. That's what triggers all the self-talk that goes on. So the first step to changing anything and creating sustained results is to become aware of how it's talking to you. But when it comes right down to it, it's not buying into it. That's the key, is to recognize it and not buy into it. Anyway, is this where you wanted to go with this, Greg?
No, this is good. And if I may add, one thing that Doug has taught me, folks, is that where critical conversations are concerned, it helps when you ask permission to share something rather than just dump it. That never works with my wife, and I'm still figuring it out. But one thing that has been unique is when I say, honey, is it all right if I share with you some things that are important to me? And of course, it has to be at the right moment, right? And of course, she's going to say, well, sure, what's on your mind? And at that point, then I would say, I've been thinking about my longevity here with, my children or grandchildren or with you, and the health that I want to have. And I've learned so much, and I'd like your help with it. Here are some of the things that I need, and here's what I'm trying to achieve. And I don't want to do it just 3 months. It needs to be behavioral change. Anyway, that, I often forget that when I'm dealing with people. We're so interested in just spewing our point of view and our feelings and our thoughts that we forget to ask permission to engage in that conversation. And then when someone says, yes, that's okay, now you're invited into their circle. Is that true, Doug?
That is absolutely true. And here's some tips for you to have those kinds of conversations. Is everybody has a door into their world. We have a wall around us, okay, to protect us. If you want to have a conversation with a spouse or someone else that's difficult, but you got to recognize they have a wall and you have one. So they'll give you the key into their world to have this conversation. And it's always backed by statements or words that are backed by some kind of emotion. And if you can hear the emotion, if you can recognize it, then you can ask a question to step into their world. And Greg's absolutely right. Our tendency as leaders in business and leaders at home, our tendency is to go right to telling, right? And when we start to tell, their eyes glaze over. Or they get triggered and they put up a wall and they're not hearing you. And so it doesn't go the way that you thought it would or hoped it would. So listen for those key words and phrases backed by emotion, and then ask a question relating to it. And then in your conversation, if you hear something that you want to bring up, a question, a suggestion, idea, then ask permission, like Greg said. As we were talking about how I want to change how I eat and food preparation and the inconvenience that it is, a question has come to mind. Is it okay if I ask you? And if you ask it that way, everybody's tendency is to go like this. and it opens up their mind to be more receptive. And so then you ask the question, or what could we do in order to make this work for both of us? Or I sense that you're resistant to me being able to do this. Please share with me what you're feeling right now. And then you can have a conversation. But until you can see, people won't open their doors to us until they feel safe, valued, and understood. And they won't open the doors to you until the opposite's true with them too. So thank you, Greg, for bringing that up. What the journey that we are all on in our health is a journey that requires other people's cooperation. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
If you're in a family, it requires that families move with you. My wife has been trying to lose pounds for a long time. She's had 2 cases of blood clots in her lungs. I mean, all these issues. And she has a different process than I do. You can tell I need 20 pounds of fat. But I've had so many health issues, I couldn't gain a pound if I wanted to. But I have other health challenges that require that I eat differently than her. And she has really bought into helping me because we created a space in which we understand each other in the way we communicate. And so thank you, Greg.
I just have to share that Doug does walk, what is it, 2 miles every day, 3 miles, or?
No, well, it's between 1 and 3 miles a day. I started that 1,227 years, 1,227 days ago.
Gotcha. And are you still doing push-ups every day? You were doing that for a while as well, too.
Not so much push-ups, but I'm doing other exercises with it. But
great.
That was my own journey. I was feeling rotten. I was feeling sick. I needed to change. And I took on a challenge to walk or run at least a mile every day for 90 days. And now it's 1,227 days that I've done it. And in the middle of 2-foot snow drifts, blowing, raining. I've removed the excuses from that because I've changed my identity about who I am.
Well, Doug, that's a perfect segue. As we reach the end of this segment, we open it up for any other questions and answers. I just want to observe that you became, you moved yourself from the victim's chair into the observer's chair. You had some health challenges. The gluten thing is real for a lot of people, and there are other things that you may or may not want to share, but the point is, you've learned how to work around them. I'm not going to let this control me. In fact, if I may share this, I recently saw a concert with Marie Osmond at Tuacahn, and she brought her nephew, David Osmond, on the stage to sing with her. Very talented young man. And he shared that he has MS, and he made the comment, I may have MS, but MS doesn't have me. And I thought that was just awesome. So Doug, and before we finish up here, our note, I wanted to thank you because your insight is representative of about 50% of us on the tribe. We're moving forward, but not all of our family wants to with us, right? And that does create some resistance in our lives, but certainly we can't let that slow us down, and there are ways to work around that. Well, Doug, let's finish up by talking about moving into the observer's chair. And incidentally, folks, if you haven't read The Observer's Chair by Dave Blanchard, it's a great book. Doug is a student of Dave Blanchard and has learned all of his techniques, and he's added his own. He's been coaching directly with Darren Hardy, who used to be the editor of Success Magazine. I just love working with Doug. But back to you, Doug. So what are some tips we leave with these good folks that are going to help us to be more intentional in our lives and to take control?
Thank you. And let me share with you one thing that really quickly accelerated my ability to change habits. Okay. There's a tool that I have access to that's 100% accurate in measuring your neural pathways. It's based on high levels of axiological mathematics. You can't fool it. And we've used it on over 250,000 executives from Fortune 50 companies down to people who are working from their homes. So it will measure it. And it won't tell us what you think, it'll tell us how you think. It will show us your habits of thinking that are being triggered that then pull you away from showing up and following through, pull you away from consistency. It will pull you away from being yourself who's a great dad or a great leader. These are the things that pull you away and create these false identities and trigger the emotions, etc. And so when I did this 11 years ago, and I took this in 15 minutes just online, you go online, you're just moving words and statements around. That's all you're doing. And it measures how you value things. And then it literally does 6 quadrillion mathematical compilations, and you see your results. And it's amazing how accurate it is in telling us where you're being triggered, how it's impacting your life, the frequency it is, and we can quickly get into the sabotaging stories related to it. And so when I did this, immediately I began to realize one thing here, that everything that we've been talking about, the resistance you feel to, and the walls you feel like you're hitting to create the long-term success with your health, it's all biology. It's all biology. It's not who you are. And here's a key principle to understand, is that when we go to try and change something, subconsciously, our subconscious thinks that we have to change our character. And that's a high mountain to climb. That's very hard and difficult and challenging. And the reality is all we have to do is we have to recognize the habit of thinking that's keeping us away from focusing on the behavior. So you don't have to focus on changing your whole character to be successful in what you're trying to do here. So anyway, I'm encouraging, if you'd like to spend 30 minutes with me, and if you'd like to take this profile, there's no cost to that, to do that. If you want to get clarity on what's holding you back, or what the walls are you're hitting in regarding to creating the success you want with your health, or even your relationships, or you're in your business, then feel free to reach out to me. I'll put the link to set up a time in the chat, if that's all right, Greg. Is that okay?
Yeah, in fact, I was going to say, Doug, what's the best way for these folks to get a hold of you? Maybe give us a couple of different ways if they'd like to follow up. And I'll just add anecdotally that 2 years ago, I took that assessment just as a free trial run. Wasn't paying Doug anything at that point in time. I was blown away. I've taken all kinds of assessments. This was very different than anything I'd ever done. And then a year later, right, Doug, we took it again, and I had actually limited many of those sabotaging behaviors and kind of changed the way I was behaving with others at work, at home. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's anyway, I put that in the chat, so you can email me. You can go right to my calendar and connect, or you can link in with me at LinkedIn, direct message me there. But I'd encourage you to do that if you want to accelerate the process. I was talking with a guy just recently. It's a corporation in which I've coached 18 of their management from the top down. And the CFO said, the greatest value you bring into our corporation, there's many of them, but what you bring in, the most valuable is how our people are now showing up at home. And then they come back and they show up much differently in a business. And so it starts in here first. It starts in here. But until we can get clear on what the sabotaging part of it is, it can feel like a frustrating process.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Doug. And to anyone on this webinar today, Tyson and I know where Doug lives. We can direct you to his email, his phone number. Folks, before we end here today, are there any other fantastic questions or insights that you'd like to share and that maybe Doug can address for a minute? Bill, you always look so ponderous. Actually, not ponderous. That means big and slow. I mean, thoughtful.
There we go. Probably applies both, right?
Yeah.
So I had the thought, as you were talking, Doug, I sure appreciate your time here with us, and Greg for helping with this too. But you know, I know I've experienced some of that change, you know, of how I see myself, and I don't know if that was, I believe it's more of a over time process, and you know, I wasn't consciously doing that. I was doing the work, and then over time I was like, this is who I want to be. My self-image changed. But is there a something I could do better consciously to kind of maybe help me in that process? You know, I think you kind of shared some things there, but I was just trying to think, you know, how better can I be aware of the chair in, or what self-talk I'm giving, or self-identity issues there. That makes sense, you know.
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. You can be, what I'm hearing you say is that how can I become aware of when I have a habit of thinking that's talking to me that's not serving me well? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I believe so. And maybe as a corollary there is, you know, how can I help my self-image, right, and stuff, you know, who I want to become that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that, well, first of all, in order to shift your self-image, you have to recognize who you really are, right? And I was going to show you a diagram today, but it's on my Zoom link. It's not on this one, so I can't pop it up. But we all have this core identity of who we really are. And the habit of thinking will pull you in away from that core identity. So how do you know if you're being pulled that way? Well, it will tell you that you can't do something, or it's excuses, or it's being a victim. And when you're hearing that kind of stuff, it is the false identity too, if you buy into it. You don't have to buy into any of this. We're not dogs and cows. We're human beings. God made us so that we could have choice. So recognizing when it's talking to you, okay? And it's always related to victimhood, judgment, comparison, all those kinds of things. So first you recognize it and say, I recognize this false identity. I'm not going to do it. This is who I really am. I am someone who can make good decisions about the food I eat. I am someone who can communicate with my wife. I am someone who can take time to do the small things that prepare me for the trip. And so it's the actions that you take that clear away the false identities and allows you to really see who you are. In reality, guys, we're all successful. We all have the abilities to do everything that we're talking about. That's who we really are. You already got it inside of you. It's just we get clouded with these false narratives and identities. So we want to clear them away. The second thing, Bill, is there is a process. And what I help people do is I help them to create a new gate with a new trigger that brings in different emotions and brings in a different stories, different talk. But that takes time to create a new neural pathway. But what I give you is I give you two little guys in your brain. And each time you take the action, then what it does is that these two little guys dig out dirt for the new neural pathway, throw it over their shoulder, and it puts it in the old one. So the brain can't dump chemical, it doesn't flow down the pathway. So that's the process of remove the false identity, then you'll see yourself as who you really are. And the second one is enhance that identity by creating through your actions. And the actions create the identity of who you are, whether it's good or positive, good or negative. Did that answer your question, Bill?
Yeah, I believe that was really helpful as to be more conscious about that and the actions. I can see that looking back, the actions are what helped me, move my identity before. So
Yeah.
I think tying that in consciously would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill, for that question. And just an anecdote there, when Doug and I first started working together, I remember I would show up on our calls and I'd say, I'm a terrible listener. And one day Doug put on the boxing gloves and he beat me up a little bit and he said, you're not a terrible listener, and you need to stop telling yourself that. You need to start saying, I'm a great listener. I'm an evolving listener. I'm an intentional listener. And it changed things, didn't it, Doug? The stories we tell ourselves have such powerful effects on who we actually are, or who we become, or who we can become, right?
And that's a great point, Greg. If all you did was start paying attention to, I want to hear myself and what I'm saying to myself, the little things. Like Greg said, I'm not a good listener. You hear people at church so often, they stand up to give a talk and they started giving excuses as to why they're not good speakers. And they go on for 10 minutes. I used to tell myself, all kinds of little subtle stories, apologizing everywhere I went. I'm sorry. Those are false identities. And you reverse it by saying, when you recognize it, really, I'm getting better and better at preparing before I go on a trip. When you say it that way, I'm getting better and better at, then the brain isn't saying, oh, yeah, right. You're full of baloney, Stoddard. Look how much you aren't doing it. When you say, I'm getting better and better at doing this, then it starts to shift the narrative. It starts to shift the identity. So the wins, the shift in the identity is in taking charge of what you say to yourself and give yourself some grace, folks. Give yourself some grace. So,
Doug, one last quick question. We have a minute left. How do you do all of that and talk so positively to yourself all the time and still not let you get a big head about yourself and stay humble and stay teachable and ready for when those bad things happen? Like, that you got hit with your two things that happened to you professionally and in your family after you'd gone so many years sort of accepting these positive things that you'd been hearing about yourself. Now we're just taking it sort of not relying on other people telling us those positive things, but now we're starting to tell ourselves these positive things and not talk negative about ourselves. And so how do you prevent that from happening to where you believe yourself too much? Does that make sense?
you mean your ego takes charge?
Yeah. Or you get too big of a head because you keep saying, oh, I'm good. I'm a good speaker. I'm an evolving listener. I'm good. I can do this. I'm okay with this. I'm on my way. I mean, at some point, is there a risk that we're going to believe ourselves a little too much? Does that make sense?
I'm going to ask a quick question here. Has that happened to you before where you got caught up in yourself, Derek?
Probably, or else it's a story that it's a fear that I have that might happen if I'm not careful. I always sort of try to stay humble and stay grounded and be aware of the things I need to work on and continually trying to grow and progress and not think I've arrived or not think I'm there.
Well, that's a great question, because sometimes we're fearful of success. And I've been there before. So one thing I could share with you real quickly because of time is I'm on this journey of what does surrender mean to me. And it's a very personal journey, my relationship with God. And I found he has a very adequate way of humbling ourselves. And so I think whenever you reinforce, Derek, who you really are, you're not arrogant. At times we may feel like it. That's okay. That's part of going through life. But we certainly don't want to hold ourselves back from developing because of the fear that we might get caught up in ourselves. Then the fear is controlling us. So for myself, I also recognize, hey, I didn't communicate very well with my wife right now. But I'm getting a little better at doing that. Did that help you, Derek?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate that, and it's probably just maybe more of a validation of the worry that I have than anything. But yes, thank you for your thoughts.
Yeah, feel free if you want to reach out to me. We can certainly go deeper into that. It's anyway, thank you.
Folks, thank you so much today. That brings us to the end of our webinar today. I would encourage you all to reach out to Doug on the Habit Breakers link. Take his sabotaging behaviors assessment. I think you'll be amazed. It's a lot of fun. Doesn't cost you anything. Well, folks, we thank you for joining today's webinar, and we hope you'll keep tuning in with Tyson and his series on tips on fitness, nutrition, science, and of course, mindset, which is what today was all about. We love you guys. Keep on keeping on, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Doug.